If you could travel back thousands of years and ask someone, what do you do for fun? You might be surprised by the answer. They wouldn't say scrolling through a glowing rectangle or binge watching a series. Instead, their eyes might light up as they describe a festival of mud, a contest of pain, or a night spent watching dogs chase flaming wheels. You see, in the ancient world, fun was rarely quiet, rarely safe, and rarely what we would recognize as entertainment today. But for them, these strange and often extreme activities were ways to celebrate life, to connect with gods, to prove bravery, and to feel alive in a world without modern comforts. In this story, we'll explore some of the most curious, bizarre, and fascinating ways people from ancient civilizations passed their free time. From the playful to the perilous, the creative to the downright chilling. So settle in, take a deep breath, and imagine the crackling of torches in the night, the sound of drums echoing across a desert, and the laughter of people who lived thousands of years ago, finding joy in ways that seem almost unthinkable today. Section 1. The Roman Empire's taste for spectacle. To the Romans, fun often came wrapped in blood and glory. Entertainment was not simply a pastime, it was a performance of power. The most famous example, of course, is the gladiatorial games. But let's go deeper, beyond the sand and swords, into the stranger forms of Roman amusement. In some arenas, Romans enjoyed mock naval battles, called naumachai. Enormous basins or flooded amphitheaters were filled with real ships and real soldiers. Thousands would gather to watch men reenact historic sea battles, often dying in the process. Imagine it, an entire man-made lake filled with the clash of oars, splashing water, and the screams of men pretending to fight, until the pretending became real. But the Romans' love for spectacle didn't end there. At festivals like Saturnalia, the normal order of society turned upside down. Slaves became masters for a day. They sat at the tables of their owners, gave orders, and feasted freely. It was chaotic, wild, and often drunken, a brief escape from the rigid social order of Roman life. Another strange Roman amusement was public punishment as performance. For the crowds, the execution of criminals wasn't just justice, it was theater. In some cases, condemned men were forced to act out myths before their deaths. A man playing Icarus might actually be thrown from a tower. Someone portraying Hercules could be burned alive. For the Romans, this merging of story and suffering was a way to experience myth through reality. Horrifying to us, but thrilling to them. Still, not all Roman fun was gruesome. They also had games that were surprisingly relatable, like dice, board games, and betting on chariot races. The Circus Maximus could hold more than 150,000 people, all screaming for their favorite charioteer. Rivalries between teams, the Reds, Blues, Greens, and Whites, became so intense that riots sometimes broke out. It was ancient fandom at its most explosive. And then there were the Roman dinner parties, which could stretch through the night, filled with music, dancing, poetry, and bizarre performances. Some wealthy hosts prided themselves on shocking their guests, serving dishes shaped like animals, or offering rare delicacies like flamingo tongues. Others hired professional jesters, or laugh makers, whose job was simply to amuse with jokes, songs, and sometimes embarrassing imitations of guests. There's even evidence that Romans found joy in strangely simple amusements. Archaeologists have uncovered carved graffiti, jokes, doodles, and even playful insults, scratched onto walls by ordinary people. One reads, We two dear men, friends forever, we're here. If you want to know our names, they are Gaius and Aulus. It's crude, but human. Proof that fun, in any century, often comes down to laughter shared among friends. Perhaps that's the charm of Roman entertainment. Beneath the blood and bravado, they were a people who adored drama, spectacle, and humor, whether in the Colosseum, the circus, or scrawled on a wall in Pompeii. Their fun was dangerous, decadent, and deeply social, a mirror of their world, where pleasure and peril walked hand in hand. Section 2. Ancient Egypt's Joyful Oddities. Festivals, games, and sacred amusements. If the Romans celebrated life through spectacle and excess, the ancient Egyptians did it through mystery and ritual. To them, joy wasn't just pleasure, it was an act of harmony with the gods. Every laugh, every song, and every dance was a tribute to balance, a gesture meant to keep chaos at bay. Their lives were ruled by the rhythm of the Nile. Its rising and falling waters marked the seasons, the harvests, and the celebrations. But within this predictability, Egyptians found infinite ways to entertain themselves, many of which feel strange, even surreal, to us today. Let's drift down the Nile, past fields of papyrus and temples shimmering in the desert heat, and step into the world of ancient Egyptian fun, where music, magic, and meaning intertwined. The Festival of Drunkenness, one of the strangest and most famous Egyptian celebrations, was known as the Festival of Drunkenness. It may sound like something out of modern college life, but this ritual had divine origins. It was held to honor Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and fertility, a radiant figure often depicted with a cow's horns and a sun disk, symbolizing joy and creation. The story goes that the sun god Ra, angered by humanity's rebellion, sent the goddess Sekhmet, Hathor's fierce, lion-headed counterpart, to punish mankind. Sekhmet unleashed destruction upon the earth, her rage unstoppable. To save humanity, Ra tricked her by pouring red beer across the land. It looked like blood. Sekhmet drank deeply, became drunk, and fell into a deep, blissful sleep. Her fury vanished, and Hathor's gentle spirit returned. To celebrate this divine mercy, Egyptians gathered once a year to drink themselves into a trance-like joy. In honor of Hathor's transformation, men and women would fill the courtyards of her temples, drink vast quantities of beer and wine, dance wildly to drums and flutes, and sing until dawn. Some accounts describe ecstatic rituals. Your participants sought visions or divine inspiration through intoxication. It was, in essence, a sacred party, joy as worship. And though the details sound wild, the meaning was deeply spiritual. By reliving Hathor's transformation, they reaffirmed the triumph of compassion over anger, peace over destruction. Games of eternity, Senet and Mehen. When they weren't worshipping the gods through music and celebration, Egyptians loved games, particularly those that connected the living and the dead. Their most popular pastime was Senet, a board game that dates back more than 5,000 years, one of the oldest in the world. Its grid of 30 squares represented the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Each move symbolized progress toward rebirth, and each setback mirrored the challenges faced by the spirit. The players rolled sticks or knuckle bones to move their pieces, and luck was seen as divine will. Winning a game of Senet wasn't just fun, it was a blessing, a sign that the gods smiled upon you. Senet boards have been found buried in tombs of pharaohs, including Tutankhamun's, as though the dead might continue their game in the next world. Imagine that, an eternal pastime, played between worlds, across time itself. Another beloved game, Mehen, was shaped like a coiled serpent, representing the protective snake god who guarded the sun on its nightly journey through the underworld. Players moved small lion-shaped pieces along the serpent's back, racing toward its head. To the Egyptians, even play was a reflection of cosmic truth. The games were symbols of divine order, wrapped in strategy and fun. The art of music and dance, joy as offering. Entertainment in Egypt wasn't just about leisure, it was about connection. Music, song, and dance were considered sacred languages, capable of pleasing the gods and lifting the human spirit. Musicians played instruments like harps, lyres, flutes, and sistrums, rattling metal instruments often used in temple rituals. The sound of the sistrum was believed to awaken the goddess Hathor and invite her blessing. Dancers swayed gracefully, their bodies telling stories of birth, death, and renewal. At banquets, guests would sit cross-legged on the floor, while dancers and musicians performed before them. The air filled with incense and the sound of rhythmic clapping. Wine flowed freely, and garlands of lotus flowers perfumed the evening. But there was something even more peculiar. Professional mourners, often women, who sang and danced at funerals. Their movements were part lament, part ritual performance, designed to guide the deceased safely into the next world. These women could cry on command, weaving sorrow and beauty into one haunting expression of faith. In a way, Egyptian entertainment was never meaningless. Even laughter and play were infused with reverence, an acknowledgement that joy itself was sacred. Strange banquet customs at elite feasts. The Egyptians mixed pleasure with the macabre. It was customary, for example, to bring out a small wooden coffin or mummy figurine during the height of the meal. The host would hold it up and say something like, "Look upon this, and remember, enjoy your life, for you too shall die one day." It sounds grim, but the message was not morbid. It was liberating. It reminded guests to savor every moment, to eat, drink, laugh, and love while they still could. This peculiar practice inspired the later Greek and Roman idea of memento mori. Remember that you will die, but the Egyptians embraced it with more grace. For them, death was simply another stage of existence, not an end. Festivals of life and rebirth. Every year, the Egyptians celebrated the Opet festival in Thebes, a magnificent event where statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried from the Karnak temple to Luxor by boat along the Nile. Thousands of people joined the procession, singing, dancing, and celebrating for days. The priests performed rituals, the pharaoh gave offerings, and the crowds rejoiced as though the gods themselves walked among them. For the Egyptians, this was not just a party. It was a renewal of the world's divine balance. The gods were pleased, the Nile would flood again, and life would continue in perfect harmony. But there were also smaller, local festivals for fertility, harvest, or the new moon, where villagers gathered to eat, play, and tell stories. Children swam in the Nile, while elders sang songs under palm trees. Some even painted their faces with ochre, believing laughter itself could drive away evil spirits. A civilization that played with purpose. What's most fascinating about Egyptian fun is that it was never trivial. Whether it was drinking in honor of Hathor, playing games of the afterlife, or dancing to awaken divine joy, their leisure was always tied to something bigger, to balance, to spirit, to eternity. The Egyptians didn't separate the sacred from the joyful. To laugh, to sing, to play, to drink, all were ways of saying thank you to the gods, to life, and to the cycles that sustain them. When you look at the painted walls of tombs, the feasting, the musicians, the dancers frozen mid-step, it's clear they wanted their fun to last forever, even in death. They imagined banquets and games continuing in the fields of paradise, beneath an eternal sun. So, while their rituals might seem strange to us, drinking to the point of visions, playing cosmic board games, or feasting beside a tiny coffin, they reveal something timeless, a truth that echoes softly across 4,000 years of history, that joy, when shared with reverence, becomes a bridge between mortal and divine. Section 3. The Greeks and their peculiar pleasures, from philosophical parties to dangerous games. When we imagine ancient Greece, our minds often wander to marble temples, sculpted heroes, and grand debates echoing in the agora. But behind the Stoic statues and lofty philosophies, the Greeks were a people who delighted in life's peculiarities, who played, competed, and even philosophized for fun. To them, leisure wasn't laziness. It was an essential part of existence, a balance between the labor of the body and the nourishment of the soul. The Greek word for leisure, skole, is the root of our modern word school, a reminder that even learning, in their eyes, was a kind of pleasure. But beyond the beauty of thought and art, the Greeks found joy in strange, often unexpected ways, from feasts of riddles to athletic rituals that bordered on madness. Let's step into that world for a moment and see how the Greeks, those lovers of logic and chaos alike, entertained themselves in ways both brilliant and bizarre. Symposia, the philosophical parties of the elite. If you were a wealthy Athenian man, the height of fun was a symposium, a gathering that was part banquet, part drinking party, part intellectual theater. These events were not the raucous feasts of Egypt or Rome, but something subtler, a dance between pleasure and intellect. Guests reclined on couches in torchlit rooms, served by slaves carrying wine diluted with water, never pure wine, for the Greeks considered that barbaric. As the cups were filled, the talk turned to philosophy, poetry, and love. The host or a designated symposiarch decided the pace of drinking and the themes of conversation. Yet these symposia could turn strange. Participants sometimes wore garlands of ivy or roses to ward off drunkenness. Some recited poetry while others played the lyre or flute. But occasionally, things would spiral into contests of wit, drunken games like katibos, where one flung wine dregs at a target, or flirtations that blurred the lines between friendship and desire. And in true Greek fashion, even these moments of silliness carried meaning. The symposium was a microcosm of Greek life, a balance between reason and indulgence, order and chaos. Philosophers like Plato even used symposia as settings for profound dialogues, where love, virtue, and truth were discussed amid laughter and wine. So while the Greeks are remembered for their logic and clarity, it's worth noting some of their greatest ideas were born in rooms filled with laughter, music, and the scent of spilled wine. Games of skill, strength, and strangeness. The Greeks loved competition. It was their heartbeat. They believed excellence, arete, could only be proven through contest, whether in athletics, art, or intellect. But alongside the noble races and famous Olympic events, there existed a range of odd and often dangerous amusements that seem almost absurd by today's standards. One example was pankration, a brutal mix of wrestling and boxing that had almost no rules. The only forbidden acts were biting and eye gouging. Fighters could choke, trip, or crush their opponents, sometimes until death, and yet it was considered an art form, a test of strength, endurance, and will. Another peculiar pastime was episkiros, an early form of football played with a heavy ball made of stitched leather. Two teams would face each other, shouting, shoving, and strategizing, not unlike modern soccer, but far rougher. But even more curious was pedalismos, a social game in which citizens voted to exile one of their own, a practice similar to ostracism, where a man who grew too powerful or arrogant could be banished for 10 years. Imagine treating banishment as a civic pastime, a strange blend of politics and entertainment, democracy and drama. And yet through all this competition, there was reverence. The games were offerings to the gods. The Olympics honored Zeus. The Pythian Games honored Apollo, and so on. Winning was not just glory, it was divine approval. Losing, however, brought deep shame. So even when Greeks played, they played with purpose and a dash of danger. The theatrical madness of Dionysus. When night fell over Athens, the people gathered not just for feasts, but for theater, and not the quiet, refined performances we might imagine. The festivals of Dionysus, god of wine, madness, and transformation, were wild and hypnotic experiences. These events began with processions through the streets, filled with singing, flute playing, and ecstatic dancing. Worshippers carried phallic symbols and masks, laughing and crying in equal measure. The boundary between performer and audience often blurred. People shouted, clapped, or wept as actors reenacted tales of tragedy, love, or divine punishment. What we now call theater was to them a sacred ritual. To watch a play was to confront the emotions that defined humanity: fear, love, rage, pity, and emerge purged, renewed. This was catharsis, the cleansing of the soul through shared emotion. But even within this sacred context, there was humor and absurdity. Greek comedies were often bawdy, filled with crude jokes, caricatures of politicians, and slapstick antics. Actors wore exaggerated masks and padded costumes that made them look ridiculous. The audience laughed uproariously, because to laugh, too, was divine. So in ancient Greece, joy and reverence coexisted. Even madness had meaning. Their laughter echoed across marble amphitheaters and through the centuries, a laughter that, at its heart, celebrated the beautiful absurdity of being human. Children's play and village amusements. Not all Greek fun was philosophical or sacred. Children had their own simple delights, many of which mirror our own. They played with knucklebones, similar to jacks, hoops, dolls, and miniature carts. Some played ball games. Others imitated adults in mock weddings or little wars. Girls had dolls made of clay or ivory, often with jointed limbs, fascinatingly detailed for their time. Boys flew kites or spun tops, and during festivals, entire villages gathered for contests of singing, dancing, or riddles. Joyful, noisy celebrations of life's small pleasures. Even pets were part of play. Monkeys, dogs, and even tame birds were trained to perform tricks. There are vase paintings showing young boys teasing dogs with balls or wrestling playfully in courtyards bathed in sun. For the Greeks, fun wasn't frivolous, it was how they honored the gods, expressed community, and explored the joy of being alive. Joy, order, and the human soul. Perhaps what makes Greek leisure so captivating is how intertwined it was with their worldview. Whether through the intellectual play of a symposium, the physical brutality of pancration, or the poetic chaos of Dionysian theater. They sought meaning in everything. They believed to live well was to play well, that life's pleasures, when approached with reverence, brought the soul closer to truth. Their amusements weren't just distractions, they were a kind of philosophy in motion. Even in their strangest rituals, there was wisdom. They saw laughter as healing, competition as sacred, and wine as a bridge to the divine. And maybe as we listen to the echoes of their songs and laughter across time, we can feel a little of that ancient understanding that joy in all its forms is one of the purest ways to touch eternity. Section 4. Ancient China's Curious Pastimes and Poetic Games. In the hush of a moonlit Chinese garden, where bamboo sways like whispers and lanterns glow with trembling light, ancient poets once gathered to play, dream, and create. For them, leisure was not a pause from life. It was life, lived with awareness, art, and a sense of eternal rhythm. Ancient China, a civilization that prized harmony, balance, and beauty, approached fun differently from most of the world. Their amusements were rarely wild or chaotic. Instead, they reflected the elegance of thought, the precision of art, and the reverence of nature. To the ancient Chinese mind, joy was a path to wisdom, and play was a reflection of cosmic order. Yet beneath the surface of refinement lay deep eccentricity. Some games bordered on mystical, others were strange, unpredictable, and deeply human. In this world, pleasure and philosophy merged, and even the simplest pastime could hold the secrets of heaven and earth. The flowing cups of poetry, the Kui Shui gathering. Imagine standing by a winding stream that snakes through a lush garden filled with peach blossoms. Along its edge, a group of poets sits cross-legged, holding cups of rice wine. The rule is simple. A cup is set afloat, drifting down the stream. Whoever it stops in front of must compose a poem before they drink. This was Kui Shui Lu Shang, the Floating Cups Banquet, one of the most enchanting and refined games in Chinese history. It was both a test of wit and an act of communion with nature. One of the most famous gatherings took place in the year 353 CE, during the Eastern Jin dynasty, when the calligrapher Wang Shiji and 41 scholars gathered at the Orchid Pavilion. They composed poems, drank wine, and celebrated the beauty of spring. Wang Shiji's reflections on that day, written in the preface to the Orchid Pavilion poems, became one of the most treasured texts in Chinese literature, a meditation on friendship, time, and the fleeting joy of existence. But what makes this pastime so moving is how it blurred boundaries between game and ritual, between intellect and instinct. It was both fun and profound. The laughter of the poets mingled with the gurgle of the stream, and every drifting cup carried a reminder. Life itself flows, and each moment, once gone, is gone forever. Crickets, fighting, and singing, the music of competition. Among the most surprising ancient Chinese amusements was cricket fighting, a pastime that seems quaint and fierce all at once. Dating back to the Tang dynasty, it became a national obsession by the Song era. Men, from peasants to emperors, kept tiny crickets in delicate cages, feeding them melon seeds and grains, listening to their chirps like one might listen to a beloved musician. But these gentle insects were also trained for combat. In imperial courts and rural villages alike, people gathered to watch crickets face off in miniature arenas. The matches were brief, intense, and oddly ceremonious. Gentle prods with tiny straws encouraged the insects to fight, Winners were celebrated, losers mourned. Some crickets were so famous that they were given names, pedigrees, even tombs. And yet, there was poetry, even in this curious pastime. The Chinese associated crickets with courage and vitality. Their steady songs symbolized persistence through the seasons. For many, raising and listening to them wasn't about violence, but about harmony, about finding beauty in small things and life in unlikely places. The great poet Du Fu once wrote, "A cricket sings in the empty hall. Its voice is the sound of autumn itself." Perhaps in that tiny voice, ancient listeners found both melancholy and peace, a reflection of their own impermanence, wrapped in the rhythm of nature. The art of board games and the dance of strategy. While some sought leisure in poetry or song, others found deep joy in the quiet tension of the board. The game Go, known in China as Weiqi, is perhaps the most enduring example. Dating back over 2,500 years, it was far more than a pastime. Weiqi was considered a model of the universe, a game where balance, patience, and foresight reflected the movements of heaven and earth. Two players alternated placing black and white stones on a grid, seeking to surround more territory than their opponent. But the game's beauty lay in its simplicity and depth. Each stone was a decision, each pattern a story. Scholars played it to sharpen the mind, generals to train in strategy, and monks to meditate on stillness and impermanence. It was both intellectual combat and spiritual practice. The Confucians saw Weiqi as a lesson in order and restraint. The Taoists saw it as a reflection of the way, the endless dance between yin and yang. So while to an outsider it might seem like just a board game, to the ancient Chinese it was a mirror of life itself, a universe made small, where every move mattered, and victory was only meaningful if achieved with grace. Banquets of puzzles and the joy of the mind. Not all Chinese fun was quiet. During great feasts, guests delighted in lantern riddles, poetic puzzles written on slips of paper and hung from glowing lanterns. Solving them was an act of both intellect and intuition. A typical riddle might hide its answer in layers of metaphor, rhythm, and symbolism. One could be about a flower, another about a proverb, or even a celestial body. Those who solved them were praised not just for cleverness, but for sensitivity, for their ability to hear the music of words. These riddles were often shared during the Lantern Festival, marking the end of the Lunar New Year celebrations. Entire cities glittered with light, laughter, and the murmurs of thinkers young and old, trying to unravel the mysteries dancing above their heads. It was a night of warmth, of human brilliance glowing like the lanterns themselves. A reminder that joy, in its highest form, often begins with curiosity. Music, dance, and the balance of beauty. Leisure in ancient China wasn't only about the mind. It was also about movement and grace. Court musicians played stringed instruments like the guqin, whose soft, ethereal tones were believed to harmonize with the soul. Dancing girls in flowing silk robes performed with fans and ribbons that traced arcs of color through the air. Yet even here, there was philosophy. The dance was not merely entertainment, it was a form of meditation. Every gesture symbolized cosmic harmony, every motion a reflection of balance between heaven and earth. Music, too, was tied to morality. Confucius once said, "If one desires to understand whether a nation is well governed, listen to its music." For the ancients, sound itself had the power to shape the heart, refine the spirit, and align the human world with the natural order. So even when they played or celebrated, it was never empty. It was always an act of tuning, of bringing one's heart in rhythm with the universe, a civilization of gentle joy. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about ancient Chinese leisure is its quietness. There were no grand spectacles, no brutal sports, no wild excess. Instead, joy was found in subtlety, in a drifting cup, a whispered poem, a singing cricket, or the perfect placement of a stone on a wooden board. It was fun, yes, but also reverent, a kind of play that elevated rather than distracted. And through these strange and lovely pastimes, the people of ancient China expressed something universal, that joy and wisdom, when balanced, become one and the same. Even now, as we imagine them beneath moonlight, playing, laughing softly, composing poems that outlived empires, we can almost feel it. That timeless peace, that serene, human joy. Section 5. The Bizarre Entertainments of Ancient Rome, Pleasure, Power, and the Theater of Madness. Beneath the blazing Mediterranean sun, the Roman Empire pulsed like a living beast, grand, confident, and hungry for sensation. To live in ancient Rome was to be surrounded by spectacle. Everywhere there was performance. In the streets, in the forums, in the vast arenas, where stone echoed with the roar of the crowd. The Romans were masters of engineering, politics, and war, but they were also connoisseurs of entertainment. And while some of their pastimes were refined, poetry, philosophy, theater, others were strange, extravagant, and at times almost unimaginable. To them, leisure was not simply about fun. It was a reflection of power, excess, and the restless spirit of an empire that wanted to feel everything. Tonight we walk among them, through the glittering feasts, the crowded baths, and the thunder of the amphitheater, to uncover the strangest ways Romans amused themselves, and the haunting echoes of joy and cruelty intertwined. The arena, when life and death became a game. Nothing embodied Roman entertainment more than the Colosseum. It was not merely a building, but a machine of emotion, a place where fear, excitement, and awe blended into one intoxicating experience. Tens of thousands filled its tiers, shouting, chanting, their faces painted by the gold light of the morning sun. At the center stood sand, raked smooth and clean before each spectacle, soon to be stained by the drama of life and death. We often think of the gladiator fights as mindless brutality, but to the Romans, they were theater, a ritual of courage and fate. Gladiators were slaves, prisoners, or volunteers seeking fame, but they trained with discipline that bordered on sacred. Their fights were choreographed yet deadly. Every movement, every strike, was part of a dance as old as the empire itself. The strangest part, perhaps, was how deeply emotional these spectacles could become. The crowd wasn't always merciless. Sometimes they wept for their favorite fighters, throwing flowers onto the sand, cheering when one spared another's life. At other times, their bloodlust ruled, a fallen opponent's fate decided by the thumb of a single emperor. In the arena, Rome faced its own reflection, magnificent, violent, and utterly enthralled by the illusion that power over life and death could somehow make one immortal. Feasts of excess, dining beyond the limits of imagination. If the Colosseum was Rome's theater of violence, its banquets were the theater of desire. Roman feasts were unlike anything else in the ancient world, a strange blend of luxury, madness, and art. Guests reclined on couches, surrounded by golden lamps and silver platters piled with delicacies. But the food itself could be extraordinary. Roasted peacock with jeweled feathers reattached, dormice stuffed with honey and poppy seeds, flamingo tongues marinated in wine. For the elite, eating was not about hunger, it was about performance. The wealthiest citizens competed to astonish their guests with dishes so elaborate they bordered on absurdity. One famous story tells of Emperor Vitellius serving a stew made from the livers of fish, brains of pheasants, and tongues of flamingos, a concoction that cost more than a soldier earned in a year. Even more curious were the vomitoria, not, as often thought, rooms for vomiting, but cleverly designed exits that allowed guests to leave discreetly between courses. Still, some accounts hint that guests would sometimes purge to make room for more food, turning pleasure into a grotesque cycle of indulgence. Yet beneath the extravagance, there was something else, a strange fragility. The Romans knew their world could vanish overnight, that empires, like men, could crumble. So they feasted as if tomorrow might never come. Every bite was a rebellion against mortality. Baths, the social sanctuaries of steam and gossip. If the feast was for indulgence, the bathhouse was for connection. Rome's baths were vast, glittering palaces of marble, mosaic, and steam, open to almost everyone, from senators to slaves. But bathing in Rome wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about being seen. The great thermae were places of conversation, politics, and pleasure. People exercised, soaked in hot pools, had massages, played games, or simply reclined on marble benches discussing philosophy. And of course, there were oddities. Some baths had libraries attached, others had gardens, theaters, even restaurants. Emperor Caracalla's baths could hold thousands at once, a city within a city, humming with the sound of voices, laughter, and the splash of water echoing through domes of stone. There was a sensuality to it all, a belief that to cleanse the body was to refresh the soul. Aromatic oils scented the air, and slaves rubbed perfumed unguents onto their master's skin. For Romans, pleasure and purity were not opposites, they were companions. Still, not everyone approved. Stoic philosophers like Seneca warned that the baths made people soft, that indulgence weakened the will. But even he admitted there was something irresistible about the warmth, the light, and the quiet hum of Roman leisure, where the world outside seemed, for a moment, to dissolve in mist. The mock naval battles and other extravagant spectacles. The Romans had an almost childlike fascination with spectacle, and sometimes their entertainments defied logic itself. One of the strangest was the Naumachia, mock naval battles, staged in enormous artificial lakes or flooded amphitheaters. Thousands of combatants, sometimes real prisoners, fought aboard ships built just for the show, under the watchful eyes of emperors and citizens. Imagine it, ships colliding beneath the marble arches of the Colosseum, waves crashing against wooden hulls, arrows flying through the spray, the air filled with smoke and cheers as entire fleets were sunk for amusement. These events could be so grand that they drained rivers or rerouted water systems to flood the arenas. Emperor Claudius once held a naval spectacle on Lake Fucin involving 19,000 men. The scale was breathtaking, but also terrifying. For the Romans, power wasn't only to be wielded, it was to be displayed. And so they turned war itself into art. Strange, terrible art that blurred the line between ceremony and cruelty. Animals, myths, and living theater. Beyond human combat, the Romans filled their games with animals, lions, leopards, elephants, even crocodiles brought from the corners of the empire. They were used in venetianes, elaborate hunts staged within arenas. Exotic beasts were pitted against each other or against human hunters. Sometimes, entire mythological scenes were reenacted using both animals and actors, a live version of legend. One such event involved Orpheus, the mythical musician who tamed wild creatures with his song. In the Roman version, a man dressed as Orpheus played the lyre while real lions and bears sat calmly before him, until, in a dramatic twist, a bear mauled him to death. To modern eyes, these entertainments seem horrific, yet to the Romans they expressed something deeper, a fascination with nature, fate, and spectacle. The arena was a mirror of the empire itself, wild, vast, and uncontrollable, and in that chaos they found wonder, the spirit behind the madness, in every strange Roman pastime. The feasts, the baths, the games. There was one thread that tied it all together, the desire to feel alive. The Romans knew they were part of something monumental, but also fragile. Their pleasures were theatrical, because their world was theatrical, a stage built on conquest, order, and decadence. Their entertainments, however cruel or grand, reflected a truth about humanity that still lingers, that we are drawn to extremes, to stories, to experiences that make our hearts race and our minds question. And so, beneath the marble and blood, beneath the laughter and wine, Rome's strangest amusements reveal not madness, but longing, a longing for meaning in the fleeting dance of life. Section 6. The Odd Pleasures of the Ancient Egyptians. Music, Perfume, and Sacred Games. The ancient Egyptians were dreamers of eternity, builders of monuments that touched the sky, and believers in a life that never truly ended. Yet for all their solemn pyramids and sacred rituals, they were also lovers of pleasure, play, and beauty. To them, joy was not a distraction from holiness, it was part of it. Their entertainments were unlike anything in the modern world, a blend of spiritual devotion, sensual delight, and superstition. Theirs was a civilization where laughter and reverence could share the same breath, where music could summon gods, and perfume could chase away evil spirits. And so, in the soft glow of oil lamps, as the Nile whispered through the night, Egyptians found the strangest and most enchanting ways to celebrate being alive. The Symphony of the Nile, music as magic. In ancient Egypt, music was not just sound, it was sorcery. Every note, every rhythm carried power. The Egyptians believed that music could heal sickness, soothe the soul, and please the gods. Even the act of playing an instrument was seen as a sacred offering. Harpists, flutists, and singers were found everywhere, in temples, at feasts, in funerals, and even in the fields where workers sang to the rhythm of their labor. One of their favorite instruments was the sistrum, a kind of rattle made of bronze or gold, shaken in the air to mimic the rustling of papyrus reeds in the wind. The sound was said to please Hathor, the goddess of love and joy. What's strange is that their music was rarely written down. It existed like breath, vanishing as soon as it was born. Yet ancient paintings show musicians performing in elegant poses, their faces serene, their hands poised mid-note. You can almost hear it, a haunting, delicate sound carried by the desert wind. There are even records of musicians playing before statues of gods, believing that divine spirits would awaken through the vibration of sound. For Egyptians, music didn't just entertain, it bridged the world between mortals and the eternal. And perhaps, When the last note faded, silence itself felt like an echo of the divine. Perfume, the invisible luxury. To the Egyptians, scent was as important as sight. Perfume wasn't simply a cosmetic pleasure. It was a sacred force. They believed aromas could protect against disease, attract love, and even guide souls through the afterlife. Every household, from the humblest home to the grandest palace, had its own blend of scents. Cones of perfumed wax were worn on the head during banquets, slowly melting in the heat, releasing waves of myrrh and lotus as the evening passed. Temples, too, were filled with fragrance. Priests burned incense in great golden bowls, filling the air with thick clouds of frankincense, cedar, and cinnamon. Each scent had meaning. Some called to the gods, others cleansed the body or blessed the spirit. Perfume was also medicine. Ancient healers mixed resins, oils, and herbs to treat wounds and fevers. Cleopatra herself was said to have doused her sails in perfume, so that when her ship arrived, people would smell her before they saw her. An entrance fit for a queen who understood that allure could be a weapon. And in tombs, perfume flasks were buried beside the dead, because even in eternity, one should still smell divine. Strange, perhaps, but in a world where sand and stone ruled, scent was the invisible art that made life soft, sweet, and sacred. Games of the afterlife, Senate and the journey of the soul. In the homes of Egypt's nobles, a quiet game once held the attention of kings and queens alike. It was called Senate, and it looked simple, a grid of squares, small pieces moved by chance. But beneath its polished surface lay something profound. Senate was more than a game. It was a reflection of existence itself, a spiritual map of the afterlife. Each square represented a step on the soul's journey through the underworld, filled with trials, blessings, and choices. Winning the game wasn't just luck. It symbolized achieving harmony and reaching the field of reeds. Paradise. Pharaohs played Senate, not merely for amusement, but as a kind of prayer. Boards were buried with the dead, their pawns frozen mid-move, as if the game of life continued beyond the grave. It was a pastime that combined strategy and faith, a meditation disguised as play. In its stillness, it captured the Egyptian view of life, that every joy, every act, and every challenge was part of the eternal game of the spirit. The festivals of the gods, music, wine, and wildness. While the Egyptians were often serene in their art, their festivals could be wild. Shockingly so. One of the most famous was the festival of drunkenness, held in honor of the goddess Hathor. It was said that in ancient times, Hathor became so enraged with humanity that she planned to destroy it. But Ra, the sun god, tricked her by flooding the fields with red-dyed beer. She drank it, became intoxicated, and her fury turned to laughter. Every year, Egyptians reenacted this story by drinking, dancing, and singing until dawn. What began as a ritual of gratitude often became a night of chaos and joy. Women played the sistrum and sang hymns to the goddess. Men wore garlands of lotus flowers. The air shimmered with music and scent, and for a moment, the boundaries between divine and human blurred. It was, in many ways, the perfect image of Egyptian pleasure, a celebration that honored gods through excess, joy as devotion, laughter as offering. And when the sun rose over the Nile the next morning, the people returned to work, calm and fulfilled, as if they had been momentarily touched by eternity. The beauty of the ordinary, simple joys beneath the sun. Not all pleasures in Egypt were grand or sacred. Some were tender, almost familiar. Children played with clay dolls and balls made from papyrus. Families gathered by the river to watch fishermen or to listen to storytellers who spun tales of magic and gods. Artists painted scenes of animals and dancers, filling the walls of tombs with images that spoke not of death, but of life continuing forever. Even the act of resting was treated with reverence. People slept on low wooden beds, their heads supported by curved headrests, carved from ivory or stone. It may seem uncomfortable to us, but to them, sleep was a sacred act, a rehearsal for the eternal rest to come. In all things, there was grace, a balance between work, worship, and delight. The Egyptians lived with the awareness that beauty was fleeting, but spirit was not. And so, they filled their days with music, fragrance, and laughter, tiny acts of eternity scattered across the sands of time. The rhythm of the eternal. When you look at how the Egyptians lived, their strange games, sacred perfumes, and joyous festivals, you begin to see a pattern. To them, pleasure was not sin. It was divine harmony. They believed that the world was built on balance, light and dark, life and death, joy and sorrow, and to live well was to dance gracefully between them. Their entertainments remind us that even in the oldest of civilizations, the human need for joy, connection, and meaning was already understood and celebrated. So when you picture the Egyptians, not as distant figures carved in stone, but as people laughing, playing, and perfuming the night air, you realize that their greatest secret was simple. To honor the gods was to celebrate being human. Section 7. The peculiar pastimes of ancient China. Crickets, calligraphy, and cups of eternity. There is a kind of stillness in the heart of ancient China, a world of mist-covered mountains, moonlit tea gardens, and courtyards where time seemed to move differently. In this land of poets and philosophers, pleasure was never loud or hurried. It was a quiet thing, cultivated with care, like a bonsai tree pruned over decades. Where the Romans might have filled their evenings with spectacle and sound, and the Egyptians with perfume and song, the Chinese found their joy in refinement, in the delicate, almost sacred balance between art, thought, and nature. Yet within this calm, there were pastimes that might seem strange to us today. The odd little joys and rituals that turned ordinary moments into poetry. Let's step into that world, where the chirp of a cricket could mean good fortune, where ink became a kind of meditation, and where even a cup of tea was a conversation with the eternal. The music of crickets, tiny singers of good luck. If you were to wander through an ancient Chinese home during the autumn months, you might have heard a faint melody, a rhythmic, whispering chirp, coming not from the fields, but from small bamboo cages, each holding a single cricket. Cricket keeping, known as Chongsheng, was one of the most beloved and curious hobbies in ancient China. It began over 1,000 years ago during the Tang Dynasty and became an obsession among poets, emperors, and scholars alike. Crickets were believed to embody vitality and courage. Their song symbolized endurance. Their fighting spirit reflected the energy of life itself. Some people collected them purely for their music, while others raised them for battle. Cricket fighting, though seemingly cruel to modern eyes, was considered an art. Competitors would carefully feed their crickets honey and bean paste, whispering encouragement before a match as if speaking to tiny warriors. But the beauty of it was not only in the contest, it was in the sound. The chirping of a cricket, soft yet persistent, was thought to invite peace into the home. The most prized crickets were kept in ornate cages made of carved jade or silver, their tones catalogued by pitch and rhythm like notes on a scale. At night, when the lamps burned low and the air turned cool, families would sit quietly and listen. The cricket's song was more than background noise. It was a reminder of life's fragility and the sweetness of impermanence. In that fragile sound, they heard the heartbeat of the world. Calligraphy, when writing became a form of meditation. In ancient China, few things were held in higher regard than the written word. But calligraphy was more than communication. It was spirit made visible. To watch a calligrapher at work was to witness stillness in motion. The brush hovered, dipped into black ink, and swept across silk or paper in smooth, deliberate strokes. Each line carried emotion, confidence, humility, patience, pride. It wasn't about perfect form. It was about expressing qi, the vital energy that connected the artist to the universe. Great masters would spend years practicing a single stroke, training their breath to move in rhythm with the brush. They believed that the state of the mind shaped the shape of the line. If one's spirit was restless, the ink would tremble. If one's heart was steady, the character would flow like water. Calligraphy was also entertainment, performed in gatherings where scholars drank wine, recited poetry, and admired one another's brushwork. Inkstones and brushes were treasured heirlooms, passed down like relics. Some emperors even held calligraphy contests, offering gold to those who could blend grace and meaning most beautifully. To the Chinese mind, calligraphy was like breathing, the most natural and profound art of all. In a world filled with impermanence, ink offered a trace of eternity, captured in a single, fleeting gesture. Tea, the sacred sip. If there is one ritual that defines the ancient Chinese soul, it is tea. The drinking of tea was not merely refreshment. It was meditation, hospitality, and philosophy intertwined. The earliest Chinese tea ceremonies, dating back to the Tang and Song dynasties, were acts of mindfulness. Everything, from the sound of boiling water to the shape of the teapot, carried meaning. Water was drawn from clean mountain springs. Leaves were selected with reverence, sometimes ground into powder or whisked into foam. The host poured in silence. Guests lifted cups with both hands, and the first sip was always taken slowly, in gratitude for the gift of warmth. There was a belief that tea reflected the drinker's soul. A rushed cup revealed an unsettled spirit. A quiet, patient cup, that was wisdom. Poets like Lu Yu, who wrote the classic of tea in the 8th century, described tea as the bridge between heaven and earth. In his words, tea tempers the spirit and harmonizes the mind. To an outsider, it may have looked like nothing more than drinking. But to those who understood, it was a silent dialogue with nature, a way to taste the moment itself. Games of wisdom, Go and the balance of the universe. Among the most ancient of Chinese pastimes was the game of Go, or Wei Qi, a simple-looking board game of black and white stones that contained infinite complexity. Invented over 2,500 years ago, it was played not for mere victory, but for enlightenment. Each move represented a moment of choice, a dance between strategy and serenity. The goal was not destruction, but balance. Surrounding your opponent with quiet strength, rather than aggression. Emperors, monks, and generals all played Go. It was said that mastering the game required a mind as calm as still water. Some players used Go to train for war. Others used it to understand life itself. The board, a grid of intersecting lines, became a symbol of the cosmos. Every stone, a world. As one ancient text said, to play Go well, you must first conquer yourself. Strange and sacred, the art of ink-blown painting. One of the lesser-known entertainments of ancient China was ink-blown art, a practice where artists would drop ink onto silk, then blow gently through a reed to scatter it into delicate branching shapes. These spontaneous forms resembled trees, mountains, or clouds, each one unique and unrepeatable. To the Chinese, these patterns reflected Ziran, the natural spontaneity of life. Artists would often stare at the random lines and imagine entire landscapes hidden within them, finishing the piece with careful brushstrokes. It was both art and divination, beauty and meditation, a moment of play that revealed the universe's own hand in creation. A quiet world of joy. When you step back and look at the ancient Chinese approach to pleasure, it feels different from that of any other civilization. It was not about noise or spectacle. It was about tuning the soul to the rhythm of the world, finding beauty in the smallest things, in the whisper of wind, the curve of a brush, the chirp of a cricket. Their amusements were not distractions from life, but reflections of it. Each pastime, from tea and calligraphy to music and miniature creatures, taught patience, reverence, and awareness. In their quiet joys, we can still hear a lesson for our own time, that true happiness doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it is as small as a drop of ink, as fleeting as a cricket's song, and as eternal as the human desire to find wonder in the ordinary. Section 8. The strange pleasures of the Vikings, feasting, riddles, and frozen amusements. The far north, 1,000 years ago, long winters, endless forests, and icy fjords where the sea breathes mist into the dawn. Life for the Vikings was hard, bound to the cold and the rhythm of the waves. Yet within that raw and dangerous world, they found unexpected joy. When people imagine Vikings, they often think of raids and battles. But between the storms, there was laughter. Between the wars, there was wonder. For the Norse were not only warriors, they were poets, gamblers, storytellers, and dreamers. Their pleasures were strange to us, fierce, but also deeply human, rooted in the fragile beauty of survival itself. Feasts of fire and frost. To the Vikings, a feast was not simply a meal. It was an act of gratitude to the gods, a binding of kinship, and a spark of warmth against the frozen dark. Imagine a great hall built of timber and smoke. Torches flicker along the walls. Shadows dance across carved runes, and long tables groan beneath platters of roasted boar, fish, and bread baked with honey. Outside, snow howls across the fjord. But inside, laughter rises, loud and alive. The drinking horns are filled with mead, the golden honey wine of the north. Cups are raised to Odin, to Freya, to the ancestors, who watch from beyond the firelight. Feasts were more than indulgence. They were storytelling arenas. Warriors sang of their voyages. Women recited sagas, and skalds, the Norse poets, performed verses so intricate they were said to charm even the gods. The most beloved tales were of riddles and boasts. Guests would take turns telling impossible riddles, or bragging about their past deeds in ways that bordered on the absurd. "I fought a whale with my bare hands," one might say. "I drank the sea dry," another would answer. It wasn't about truth, it was about wit, a verbal duel where the weapon was imagination. In these feasts, joy was survival turned into art. Every laugh was defiance against the endless winter. Games of strength and madness. When the nights grew long and the winds screamed through the valleys, the Vikings tested their strength in strange and brutal games. One of their favorites was glima, a traditional wrestling sport still practiced in Iceland today. Fighters wore special belts and used quick, graceful movements to throw each other off balance. It was not just brute force, it was rhythm, cunning, and respect. Victories were celebrated, but humility was honored more, for arrogance could bring the wrath of the gods. Yet some Viking games veered toward the bizarre. There was Natalaker, a ball game somewhat like hockey, but with almost no rules. Players swung wooden bats, tackled one another violently, and fought for control of a leather ball. Sometimes on ice, sometimes in mud. It wasn't unusual for the game to end in bruises or even blood, yet it was played with laughter. They believed that play mirrored battle, that to keep their courage sharp, they had to test it, even in sport. And then there were drinking games, contests of endurance, where participants would drain horns of mead while reciting poetry or riddles without mistake. If someone stumbled over a verse, they had to drink again. As the night went on, the mistakes multiplied, and so did the laughter. To the Vikings, excess was not shameful, it was proof of vitality. To live fiercely was to live fully. Riddles and wisdom, the game of wits. For all their strength, the Norse admired something even greater: cleverness. The sagas are full of riddles and verbal duels, where heroes and gods alike battled not with swords, but with words. One of the oldest examples comes from the Poetic Edda, in a tale called Vafthrudnismal, where Odin himself disguises as a wanderer and challenges a giant to a contest of knowledge. They ask each other impossible questions. Where did the sun come from? What lies beyond the edge of the world? Each answer must be true and wise. The loser forfeits not only pride, but life. Riddles were considered sacred, a way to sharpen the mind and connect with divine knowledge. Around the hearth, families would repeat the riddles of the gods, mixing laughter with reverence. Even common folk played riddle games during long winter nights. They would weave questions from nature. I go around in circles, yet I always return to the beginning. I am the wind, or am I your breath? To solve it was to touch mystery. These small exchanges carried a deeper truth, that for the Vikings, intelligence was not separate from strength. A sharp mind could win where a sharp sword failed. Music, stories, and dreams by the fire. After the feasting and the games, when the mead was nearly gone and the fire dimmed, the Vikings turned to their oldest pleasure: storytelling. In the glow of the hearth, skalds would recite the Eddas, the great mythic tales of creation and chaos, of Thor's hammer and Loki's tricks, of heroes who sailed beyond the known sea. Their voices rose and fell like the wind, and the words carried power, to remember, to teach, to bind a people together. Music accompanied the tales, the hum of a lyre, the soft beat of a drum, the haunting tones of a flute carved from bone. The melodies were simple, but hypnotic, made to echo through wooden halls like whispers from another world. Sometimes, children fell asleep to those songs, dreaming of dragons and gods. Sometimes, Warriors listened in silence, knowing that one day their deeds too might be sung. The Norse believed that words outlived flesh. To be remembered in a song was a second kind of immortality. Amusements of ice and fire. It may surprise you, but the Vikings were early lovers of winter sports. Archaeologists have found ancient wooden ice skates carved from animal bone, strapped to leather boots and gliding over frozen lakes. A momentary escape from the hard rhythm of northern life. In these games, you see the Viking heart, fierce, playful, and endlessly alive. They took what the land offered, ice, wood, storm, and made of it delight. A hearth in the heart of the cold. When you look closely at Viking leisure, something beautiful emerges. Their amusements were rough, yes, but never empty. Each carried meaning, strength, wit, courage, memory. In their laughter and psalms, they celebrated life against a world that was often cruel. They turned hardship into ritual and danger into play. They remind us that joy doesn't require comfort, only connection. Even in the harshest cold, a fire can burn, and even in the darkest night, a story can keep the spirit warm. And perhaps that is the truest Viking gift of all. Not conquest, not gold, but the simple art of being fiercely, joyfully alive. Section 9. The unusual amusements of ancient India. Chess, parrots, and monsoon dreams. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scent of sandalwood and jasmine drifting through the humid evening air. The sun sinks behind distant palms, painting the sky in 1,000 shades of gold and rose. Somewhere, a temple bell hums softly. In a courtyard surrounded by carved pillars, people sit beneath oil lamps, talking, laughing, and playing strange games. Beautiful games that have echoed through the centuries. Ancient India was a land of contrasts, of scholars and kings, mystics and musicians, ascetics and poets. But what is often forgotten amid tales of wisdom and warfare is how these people spent their leisure, how they sought joy, challenge, and companionship in ways that were as unusual as they were ingenious. Their amusements reveal not only how they passed time, but how they thought, how they dreamed, and how they touched the infinite through play. The birth of chess, the game of the mind and the soul. It is said that one evening, in the court of an Indian king around 1,500 years ago, a wise man arrived carrying a simple wooden board divided into 64 squares. On it, your pieces carved from ivory and ebony, elephants, horses, chariots, and foot soldiers. The man called it Chaturanga, the 4 divisions of the army. Unlike the games of luck that came before, Chaturanga was a game of thought, of patience, of strategy. It wasn't about chance, it was about the mind. Each move reflected the movements of war, yet in miniature. The king learned to think ahead, the minister to plan, the soldier to sacrifice. It was more than entertainment. It was philosophy disguised as play. It taught the illusion of control, the inevitability of loss, and the beauty of foresight. Centuries later, this game would travel west through Persia and become known as shatranj, and eventually chess, the royal game that still challenges the human mind today. But in its origin, chaturanga was not played in silence. It was accompanied by conversation, by laughter, by music from a distant vina. The game became a meeting of minds, nobles, poets, and scholars, gathering to outthink one another while sipping warm spiced milk and listening to rain fall softly outside. The art of animal companionship, talking parrots and storytelling birds. One of the most unexpected pastimes in ancient India was the training of talking parrots, not merely as pets, but as companions and storytellers. In the courtyards of wealthy families, green parrots with ruby-colored beaks would perch on ornate cages made of gold and bamboo. These birds were taught to mimic not just human speech, but to recite verses from poetry and epics. Some were even trained to deliver moral tales, like tiny feathered philosophers. The Shuka Saktati, or 70 Tales of the Parrot, is a Sanskrit collection dating back to the 12th century. Stories supposedly told by a parrot to its mistress to keep her entertained and out of trouble while her husband was away. Each night, the clever parrot would weave a story filled with wit, warning, or wisdom, always ending in suspense, persuading the woman to stay home for one more evening to hear the next tale. These parrot tales became a form of living theater, where the line between human and animal blurred, and where wisdom flew on wings. Beyond their storytelling charm, parrots symbolized devotion and awareness. To the ancient Indians, the ability of a bird to speak was a miracle, a reminder that the divine could express itself through any form if one only listened closely enough. Games of rain and rhythm, monsoon festivities. When the monsoon arrived, with clouds like mountains and rain that fell for weeks, India transformed. The parched earth turned emerald, and the air filled with the scent of wet soil and mango blossoms. It was the season of rest and renewal, but also of play. People celebrated the rains with games that mirrored nature's rhythm. One of the most charming was Palankuji, a board game still played in South India today. A wooden board, carved with 14 small pits, was filled with tamarind seeds, shells, or polished stones. Players took turns moving the seeds in intricate patterns, a dance of calculation and luck that could last for hours. Women and children gathered under shaded verandas to play while the rain whispered on the roofs. Laughter mingled with the patter of drops, creating a kind of quiet joy that felt timeless. Elsewhere, young men climbed slippery poles greased with oil in contests of strength and balance, cheered by crowds who sang folk songs about the monsoon's blessings. The games were lighthearted but symbolic, a celebration of endurance, of persistence against the odds, much like life itself. During these months, even kings relaxed the strictness of court. There were poetry contests, music recitals, and games of chance played with cowrie shells. The world slowed down. And in that slowing, life became a kind of meditation. Performances for the gods, dance, shadow, and fire. In ancient temples and village squares, evenings were filled with performances that combined play, ritual, and devotion. The Yatchagana and Kudiyattam dramas, for instance, were ancient theatrical traditions where actors, dancers, and musicians brought mythological tales to life. But these weren't quiet performances. They lasted all night, through music, laughter, and improvisation. The audience didn't merely watch, they participated, calling out, reacting, becoming part of the myth. Even more fascinating were shadow plays, the earliest form of cinema, one could say. Flat leather puppets painted in bright dyes were held before oil lamps. Their moving silhouettes danced across white cloth screens, telling stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. To children, it was magic. To adults, it was memory, myth reborn through light and shadow. For the ancient Indians, play and spirituality were not separate. To act out the divine was a way of touching it. Every game, every song, Every story was a small prayer to the endless dance of creation, gambling with fate, the sacred and the reckless. While wisdom and devotion guided many of India's amusements, there was also room for risk. Dice games, for instance, were wildly popular and dangerously addictive. The Mahabharata, one of India's greatest epics, begins its tragedy with a game of dice between the noble Yudhishthira and his cunning cousin Shakuni. What starts as innocent play becomes obsession and eventually ruin. It was a warning, yet the thrill of dice remained irresistible. Even ordinary people played with handmade dice carved from ivory or crystal, believing that luck was the whisper of the gods. To win was not just fortune, it was divine favor. To lose was a lesson in humility. Games of fate were reminders that human life itself is a gamble, and that joy, like loss, is part of the eternal play. The art of leisure. In ancient India, amusement was not idle. It was a way to explore the mind, honor the body, and touch the sacred through joy. Whether in the quiet contemplation of a chessboard, the playful chatter of a parrot, or the rhythm of a dancer's foot on temple stone, every pleasure carried meaning. They found entertainment not in distraction, but in awareness, the art of being fully alive in the moment. And as the night deepened, when the rain still fell, and lamps flickered in the dark, people gathered around the sound of a storyteller's voice, a voice that could make time itself pause, if only for a heartbeat. Section 10. The Curious Games of Ancient China. Kites, Go, and the Dance of Shadows. Imagine walking along the banks of the Yellow River 2,000 years ago. The sun is just beginning to rise, painting the mist in soft apricot hues, and fishermen push their boats through gentle ripples of water. You hear the chatter of children and the laughter of townspeople, mingling with the occasional whistle of a wind-blown kite. Leisure in ancient China was not idle. It was a deliberate practice, a way of cultivating both the mind and spirit, and it came in the form of games and playful rituals that were sometimes subtle, sometimes daring, and always fascinating. Kites, wings of imagination, and messages of the sky. One of the most whimsical pastimes of ancient China was kite flying. Unlike the modern lightweight kites of silk and paper, these early kites were sometimes massive. Constructed of bamboo frames covered with silk, painted with vibrant dragons, phoenixes, and symbols of luck. They were not merely toys, they were spiritual tools, messengers to the heavens, and sometimes instruments of war. Legend tells that during the Han Dynasty, General Han Xin used kites to measure distances for military campaigns, tying strings to flags to calculate spacing for troops. Children, of course, were not burdened with such seriousness. They ran across fields and rooftops, letting their kites dance in the wind, learning patience and the delicate art of balance. The wind itself was a teacher. Children learned to feel the subtle changes in currents, to adjust tension in the string, and to predict when the kite would rise gracefully or dip suddenly. Kite flying was a meditation in motion, a dialogue between human skill and the invisible forces of nature. Some festivals even featured kite competitions, where skill and imagination merged. Winners were celebrated not only for technical ability, but for the artistry of their designs, a reflection of the ancient belief that play was an expression of beauty and harmony in the universe. Go, the sacred battle of minds. While the skies were alive with color, on the ground, the ancient Chinese were engaged in games of strategy. Chief among them was Go, Known as Weiqi in Chinese, a board game that seems simple but is infinitely complex. Two players take turns placing black and white stones on a 19 by 19 grid, vying to control territory. Go was more than a game, it was a mirror of life itself. Military leaders practiced it to sharpen strategy. Scholars played it to hone patience, and poets often meditated over a board for hours, letting the movements of stones inspire their verses. Ancient manuals describe the ideal player as calm, thoughtful, and reflective, qualities that extended beyond the board and into daily life. Go taught foresight and humility. Every stone played carried consequences, just as every decision in life shapes destiny. It was a way to train the mind for leadership, wisdom, and balance. The game's elegant simplicity concealed its infinite depth, making it one of the most enduring pastimes in the world. Even today, the echoes of Go can be felt in every thoughtful decision, every cautious move made with both mind and heart. Shadow puppetry, dancing with light and story. Beyond kites and board games, evenings in ancient China were often illuminated by flickering lanterns and animated by the art of shadow puppetry. These performances combined storytelling, music, and intricate craftsmanship to create a magical, almost hypnotic experience. Puppets were carved from translucent leather, painted with meticulous detail, and manipulated by skilled hands behind screens. The shadows they cast moved like living figures, enacting heroic legends, moral tales, or comical anecdotes. Unlike modern cinema, the stories were interactive. The audience would call out, react, and even suggest plot twists, creating a collaborative experience that blurred the line between performer and spectator. Shadow plays were more than entertainment. They were a way to connect communities, to pass on cultural wisdom, and to explore human emotion in a shared space. Children learned from these performances without realizing they were absorbing lessons about courage, justice, and ingenuity. The flickering light and the gentle sound of bamboo clappers created an atmosphere of calm fascination, drawing everyone into a shared dream beneath the night sky. Mahjong and the Dance of Chance. Though slightly later in history, the ancestors of Mahjong also began taking shape during the Han and Tang dynasties, combining luck, strategy, and social interaction. Tiles were made of bone or bamboo, intricately carved with symbols representing seasons, animals, and elements. Players had to form sets and runs, matching patterns and predicting the moves of opponents. Mahjong was not merely a pastime, it was a test of memory, observation, and intuition. It allowed communities to gather, to talk, to laugh, and to bond over shared victories and defeats. As in many Chinese games, it embodied the philosophy that chance and skill coexist in every aspect of life, reflecting the delicate balance between human effort and fate. Even then, the game was often associated with meditation. A player needed focus, patience, and serenity to achieve mastery. Winning was not simply a matter of luck, but a reflection of one's inner calm and awareness of the unfolding patterns of the world. The festivals of play, lanterns, fire, and games. Seasonal festivals offered another layer of recreation, combining spectacle, ritual, and amusement. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, lanterns of every size and shape floated across gardens and rivers, while mooncakes were shared as children played games of riddles and guessing. The Lantern Festival itself often involved elaborate kite contests, lantern riddles, and even small-scale martial games. Ancient playgrounds, whether outdoors in temple courtyards or along riversides, echoed with laughter and light. Games were imbued with lessons, teamwork, strategy, honesty, and courage, and children learned that play could be both beautiful and instructive. Even during harsh winters, families gathered indoors for music, riddles, and storytelling. These activities weren't simply ways to pass the time. They were invitations to engage with culture, with nature, and with the rhythm of life itself. Harmony of mind, body, and spirit. The curious amusements of ancient China reveal a profound philosophy. Play is not separate from life. It is life itself, mirrored in small, deliberate gestures of joy, challenge, and creativity. From the soaring heights of kites to the quiet intensity of Go, from the magical dance of shadows to the rhythm of mahjong, these games were ways to learn, connect, and transcend ordinary experience. In every game, there was a lesson: to move thoughtfully, to watch carefully, to embrace chance, and to celebrate the ephemeral beauty of each moment. Ancient Chinese games and pastimes were meditations on harmony, patience, and wonder, lessons we can still carry into our own lives today. As the sun sets along the river and lanterns flicker like stars in the evening mist, imagine children laughing, stones moving across boards, and puppets dancing on screens. Imagine a world where leisure was a practice, where play was a pathway to wisdom, and where every game was a small journey into the heart of human curiosity. Section 11. Strange and surprising games of ancient Rome. Picture yourself in the heart of ancient Rome, walking along the bustling streets lined with stone buildings and marble fountains. Merchants shout their wares, the scent of bread and herbs drifts through the air, and children play in the courtyards of villas, their laughter mingling with the distant clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Play in Rome was far from idle. It was a window into the culture, a reflection of social hierarchy, and often a test of courage, skill, or cleverness. Tally and tesserae, dice and bone games. One of the most popular pastimes for Roman children and adults alike involved dice games, often played with small knucklebone-shaped objects called tally or flat square pieces called tesserae. The knucklebones, originally taken from sheep or cattle, were carved and polished to become the Roman version of dice. Unlike modern dice, each side had a symbolic value and often bore images of gods or numerals, linking the game to luck and divine favor. Romans believed that skill and fate intertwined in these games. Players would toss the bones, predicting outcomes, calculating odds, and often betting small tokens or sweets. Children learned arithmetic and strategy through casual play, while adults sometimes used these games as a form of subtle competition or social negotiation. Dice were not merely toys. They were instruments of both amusement and reflection, a miniature theater of chance that mirrored life itself. Interestingly, Roman authors sometimes noted that even emperors were fond of tossing dice. Augustus, according to some accounts, enjoyed quiet evenings rolling knucklebones in his private quarters. Games of chance were thus both accessible and prestigious, bridging the gap between childhood innocence and adult sophistication. Ludus latrunculorum, the soldier's strategy. If dice tested luck, latrunculi, often called ludus latrunculorum, tested strategy. This was a Roman board game, sometimes likened to chess or checkers, where players commanded soldiers, or latrones, meaning robbers or mercenaries, in battle-like scenarios. Each player sought to capture or block the opponent's pieces through careful planning. Board games such as La Truncoli were more than diversions. They were training grounds for tactical thinking. Young Romans learned the principles of war, the importance of foresight, and the consequences of miscalculation, all while seated comfortably in the shade of a courtyard. Scholars suggest that these games helped cultivate qualities valued in Roman society: discipline, patience, and strategic insight. The game boards were often beautifully crafted, made of wood, ivory, or stone, with carved pieces resembling miniature soldiers. Roman children could spend hours moving their pieces, imagining the clash of armies on distant fields. The game reinforced a sense of order, the subtle thrill of competition, and the satisfaction of outsmarting an opponent. Harpastum, a rough-and-tumble sport outside the calm of board games and dice. Roman children and adolescents engaged in harpastum, a game resembling a blend of modern rugby and tag, played on fields or in streets. Two teams vied to capture a small ball and retain possession while fending off opponents. The game required agility, strength, and teamwork, often leaving participants bruised, exhilarated, and laughing. Harpastum was more than physical exercise. It was a microcosm of Roman values. Discipline, endurance, and cooperation were celebrated, and the game's physicality mirrored the militaristic spirit of Rome. Adult soldiers sometimes played similar exercises to maintain fitness. And even emperors were known to encourage athletic contests as displays of civic virtue. Interestingly, harpastum could be chaotic, with spectators cheering, parents laughing, and streets echoing with the cries of playful combat. It reflected a society where skill and physicality were admired, and where childhood play prepared the next generation for challenges of both mind and body. Toy soldiers, dolls, and miniature chariots. Roman children also engaged in imaginative play, using miniature chariots, dolls, and figurines. These toys were often made from clay, wood, or bone, and could be simple or elaborate. Chariots came with tiny horses and wheels, and dolls were sometimes dressed in miniature garments resembling adult fashions. These toys allowed children to enact scenarios they observed in their daily lives, from family gatherings to religious ceremonies, even mimicking gladiatorial games. Play became a rehearsal for social understanding and moral lessons, providing a safe space to experiment with roles and responsibilities. For girls, dolls could teach domestic skills and social etiquette, while boys often favored soldiers and chariots, mirroring Rome's militaristic culture. Yet the joy was universal. Children laughed, argued, and collaborated, engaging with each other and the objects that sparked their creativity. Roman festivals, play on a grand stage. Roman festivals, such as the Saturnalia or the Ludi Romani, provided another dimension to play. Streets and arenas were filled with games, theatrical performances, and athletic competitions. Even children could participate in public games, races, or small contests, learning about civic pride, tradition, and communal joy. During Saturnalia, social roles were reversed. Masters served slaves, and gambling was temporarily permitted, a playful inversion that highlighted the role of leisure and games in maintaining societal balance. Children watched, learned, and sometimes participated, discovering that play was intertwined with religion, politics, and communal life. The essence of Roman play. Games in ancient Rome were not mere distractions. They were reflections of a civilization's values. Dice taught chance and strategy. Board games honed intellect. Harpastum strengthened the body, and dolls and chariots nurtured imagination. Festivals provided communal joy, reinforcing traditions, while offering freedom to explore roles and skills in a controlled environment. In all these activities, play was a vital conduit for learning, socialization, and enjoyment. The lessons of patience, foresight, skill, and resilience were embedded in every toss of a die, every strategic placement of a piece, and every spirited race across a dusty field. Play bridged childhood and adulthood, preparation and leisure, the ordinary and the extraordinary. As the sun sets over the Roman Forum and the shadows lengthen across cobbled streets, imagine children laughing, dice clattering on tables, miniature chariots racing through open courtyards, and young athletes chasing a ball in spirited harpastum. Play in ancient Rome was as much a celebration of life as it was a practice of wisdom, a timeless reminder that joy and learning can dance together in harmony. Section 12. Ancient Egyptian Games and Playful Rituals. Imagine walking along the Nile at dawn, the golden light glinting on the river's gentle waves, and children's laughter echoing from the mud-brick homes lining the banks. In ancient Egypt, play was not just a pastime. It was a window into daily life, spirituality, and social structure. From simple toys to elaborate games, Egyptian children, and even adults, found joy, learning, and creativity in playful activities that reflected both their environment and their culture. Senet, the game of passing through. One of the most iconic games of ancient Egypt was Senet, often referred to as the game of passing through. This board game, played by both children and adults, consisted of a grid of 30 squares arranged in 3 rows of 10. Players moved their pieces across the board according to throws of small sticks or knucklebone dice. Though it might appear simple at first glance, Senet held profound spiritual significance. The Egyptians believed that the movement of pieces symbolized the soul's journey through the afterlife, navigating obstacles and seeking favor from the gods. Tomb paintings frequently depict pharaohs and nobles playing Senet, suggesting that skill in the game was linked to divine order and preparation for eternity. Children, while playing for fun, also absorbed cultural values, learning patience, strategy, and the idea that life was a journey with challenges and rewards. Senet boards varied from plain wooden designs to elaborately carved ivory or stone versions, some adorned with hieroglyphics representing spells and prayers. Even the act of playing was almost ritualistic, connecting the mundane to the sacred and embedding lessons about destiny, perseverance, and morality into a simple game. Hounds and Jackals. The ancient race. Another fascinating pastime was Hounds and Jackals, a race-like board game that blended strategy and luck. The board consisted of 2 parallel tracks, often resembling elongated rectangles with a series of holes or markings. Each player moved their pieces according to throws of sticks or dice, racing to reach the end first. The game was often accompanied by betting or tokens, and, like Senet, it carried symbolic undertones. Some scholars suggest that the game reflected the Egyptian fascination with hunting, dogs, and animals' agility, teaching children the importance of swiftness, foresight, and careful planning. The tension of racing to the finish line, combined with the playful competitiveness, created a lively social environment in courtyards and homes. Hounds and Jackals also offered a unique way for children to practice counting and simple arithmetic, demonstrating that play was as much about mental development as entertainment. The combination of skill, chance, and social interaction made it a beloved pastime across generations. Miniature toys and figurines. Beyond board games, Egyptian children delighted in miniature toys and figurines. Dolls made from wood, clay, or linen often had movable limbs and could be dressed in miniature garments resembling adult fashions. Boys frequently played with small animals carved from wood or stone, or toy soldiers representing the military culture of Egypt. Miniature boats were particularly popular, reflecting the Nile's central role in daily life. Children could simulate voyages along the river, reenacting fishing trips, ceremonial processions, or adventures inspired by stories told by elders. These toys allowed children to practice imagination, creativity, and storytelling, embedding cultural narratives into the fabric of daily life. Toys also served educational purposes. Dolls could teach domestic roles and responsibilities, while miniature soldiers or boats could teach social organization, strategy, and spatial awareness. Play was thus a form of learning, a rehearsal for adult life, and a joyful celebration of imagination. Music, dance, and ritual play. Egyptian play often intertwined with music and dance. Children participated in ritual dances during festivals, using small drums, rattles, and sistrums. These activities were not only entertaining, but also spiritually significant. Music and movement were believed to attract divine favor, celebrate seasonal cycles, or honor deities like Hathor, the goddess of music and joy. Young Egyptians might practice songs, rhythmic clapping, or choreographed movements during these communal events, learning coordination, rhythm, and cooperation. Festivals provided a safe space for children to experiment with roles, interact socially, and internalize cultural rituals in a playful context. Even daily chores could become playful. For instance, fetching water or gathering food sometimes included games of skill or races, turning routine tasks into enjoyable challenges. This blending of work, ritual, and play highlights the holistic approach Egyptians had to learning and leisure. Animal play and pet interaction. Animals played a prominent role in Egyptian leisure. Cats, dogs, and even monkeys were kept as companions, and children often engaged in interactive games with these animals. Gentle wrestling, chase games, or teaching tricks strengthened bonds between humans and animals, while providing physical exercise and emotional satisfaction. Some children also practiced mock hunting or archery, often using small wooden bows or nets. These activities were both recreational and educational, preparing children for practical survival skills while instilling respect for nature. Observing and imitating adult hunting behaviors was part of this playful learning, emphasizing the interconnectedness of daily life, skills, and amusement. The role of play in ancient Egyptian life. Play in ancient Egypt was not frivolous. It was integral to social, educational, and spiritual development. Through games like Senet and Hounds and Jackals, children learned strategy, patience, and foresight. Miniature toys and figurines nurtured creativity and social understanding. Music, dance, and ritual games connected play to spirituality and communal identity, while interaction with animals reinforced empathy and practical skills. Play provided a calming rhythm to daily life, offering structure, learning, and joy. Whether rolling dice, racing pieces across a board, or mimicking adult tasks with toys, children absorbed lessons about culture, morality, and human relationships. In this way, ancient Egyptian play was both a mirror of society and a training ground for future generations, blending amusement, education, and spiritual reflection into a seamless experience. As the sun sets over the Nile and children return to their homes, the echo of laughter and the clatter of toys remind us that across millennia, the essence of play remains timeless, a space where curiosity, imagination, and joy come together to nurture the mind and spirit. Section 13. Playful festivals and street games across ancient cultures. Imagine stepping into a bustling street of an ancient city, with the smells of baked bread and spices mixing with laughter and music. Children dart between market stalls, adults gather in squares, and the air vibrates with excitement. Festivals and street games were central to life across ancient civilizations, blending amusement, social bonding, and cultural expression in ways that transcended mere entertainment. Egyptian festival fun. In ancient Egypt, festivals were vibrant, playful occasions that involved the entire community. During the Opet festival, children often participated in processions alongside adults, waving small flags, playing miniature instruments, and performing choreographed dances. These playful rituals were designed to honor gods, such as Amun-Ra, and instill a sense of order, joy, and communal identity. Street games sometimes arose spontaneously during these festivals. Children chased each other in mock hunts, played tag in the temple courtyards, or recreated historical events with small toys and figurines. Even competitive games like tug-of-war using ropes were common, allowing young people to test their strength while participating in a larger social framework. Festivals provided safe environments for creativity, imagination, and social learning, merging play with spirituality in uniquely Egyptian ways. Greek agora games. In ancient Greece, the agora, or public marketplace, was not only a hub for commerce, but also a playground. Children and teenagers played ball games, rolled hoops, and engaged in early versions of tag and hide-and-seek. Athletic contests, which later evolved into the Olympic Games, also began as simple, playful competitions among youth. Street performers often captivated crowds, performing acrobatics or storytelling acts, and children eagerly tried to imitate their movements. In some cities, festivals like the Panathenaic Games featured playful competitions where children could race, jump, or wrestle under the watchful eyes of older spectators. These activities provided both physical exercise and moral lessons, emphasizing fairness, skill, and respect for rules, values deeply embedded in Greek culture. Roman ludi and public entertainment. In ancient Rome, festivals and public games, known as ludi, were central to civic life. While adults watched theatrical performances, gladiatorial games, or chariot races, children often joined in street contests and simple games. Roman youth played with dolls, miniature chariots, and hoops, practicing dexterity and coordination. Roman festivals also included playful competitions like sack races, foot races, and ball games. These events reinforced social bonds, provided opportunities for skill development, and offered light-hearted relief from the daily routines of work and schooling. Street games allowed children to mimic adult activities, preparing them for social roles while nurturing creativity and spontaneity. Chinese Lunar New Year and child play. In ancient China, festivals such as the Lunar New Year provided opportunities for children to engage in playful rituals. Streets were decorated with colorful banners, drums, and lanterns, while children performed lion dances or helped set off small fireworks. Games included spinning tops, string games, and early board games, often played in courtyards or along the city walls. Parents encouraged these activities to teach coordination, dexterity, and social etiquette. The playful energy of festivals also reinforced cultural traditions, blending fun with learning in a harmonious rhythm that mirrored the cycles of nature and family life. Mesoamerican festivities and youth games. In Mesoamerican cultures like the Aztecs and Maya, festivals were rich in symbolism, storytelling, and ceremonial play. Children participated in dances, musical performances, and mock ritual games that mirrored adult ceremonies. For example, young people might reenact mythological battles using small weapons or props, practicing agility and teamwork in a controlled, playful context. Street games included ball games played with rubber balls, which were both recreational and spiritually significant. These activities reinforced cultural narratives, teaching children about courage, skill, and the values of their communities. Festivals served as immersive classrooms where play, learning, and social bonding intersected seamlessly. The universal language of play across cultures. Street games and festival play shared common features. They were inclusive, participatory, and often mirrored adult life. Playful rituals taught children social norms, coordination, strategy, and creativity, while festivals provided structured environments that encouraged interaction and cooperation. Whether chasing hoops in the Greek agora, performing dances during Egyptian temple festivals, racing with friends in Rome, or spinning tops during the Chinese Lunar New Year, the essence of play remained consistent. It nurtured curiosity, physical skill, and social understanding. Play connected generations, allowed experimentation, and offered a safe space for expression and joy. The sounds of laughter echoing through ancient streets, the clatter of toys, and the rhythmic movement of dancers and athletes remind us that play has always been central to human experience. Festivals and street games were not merely diversions. They were a vital part of cultural transmission, education, and community cohesion. They created memories, bonds, and lessons that carried children into adulthood with a sense of belonging, skill, and wonder. Section 14. Seasonal and environmental games in ancient societies. Imagine the rhythms of nature guiding the pace of daily life in ancient times. Seasons dictated work, celebrations, and importantly, play. Children and adults alike found ways to interact with their environment, turning fields, rivers, and forests into dynamic playgrounds. These seasonal and environmental games were as much about cultural tradition as they were about amusement, blending nature, community, and creativity in uniquely historical ways. Winter games in Northern Europe. In colder climates of Northern Europe, winter brought snow, ice, and long nights. Communities adapted by inventing games that embraced the icy landscape. Children slid down snow-covered hills on wooden sleds, often racing to see who could reach the bottom first. Snowball fights were common, not only as play, but as a way to develop agility and teamwork. During village festivals, adults sometimes joined in ice skating contests or sliding competitions. These activities were both fun and practical. They trained physical coordination, endurance, and courage in harsh environments. The playful energy of winter reinforced social bonds, keeping spirits high despite the cold, and connected participants to the rhythm of the season. River and water games in ancient civilizations. Water was central to daily life for many ancient societies, and rivers, lakes, and canals became natural playgrounds. In Egypt, children and even teenagers often played in the Nile during festivals or after school, practicing swimming, floating, and playful races. Small boats or rafts were used in mock naval battles, helping young people learn balance and strategy in an aquatic setting. In ancient China, river festivals involved boat races, floating lanterns, and competitive water games. Children imitated these activities, constructing miniature boats to sail along small streams. These games were not only entertaining but also instilled practical skills for navigating waterways, a vital part of life in civilizations dependent on rivers for food, transportation, and trade. Field and harvest games. In agricultural societies, fields during planting or harvest seasons became stages for playful contests. In Mesoamerican cultures, children and youth often engaged in mock hunts, chasing small animals or using sticks to simulate archery. These games taught important survival skills such as agility, observation, and hand-eye coordination. Similarly, European villages hosted seasonal fairs after harvest, where children participated in sack races, tug-of-war, and obstacle courses. These games celebrated the bounty of the season, allowed intergenerational interaction, and reinforced communal traditions. Play was deeply tied to the cycles of nature, teaching respect for the land and the rhythm of human labor. Forests and adventure games. Forests and wooded areas provided space for exploration and imaginative play. Ancient Greek children often played hide-and-seek among olive groves, while Roman youth might enact miniature battles or heroic adventures inspired by mythology. These games encouraged spatial awareness, creativity, and strategic thinking, all within the safe boundaries of familiar natural environments. In some Asian cultures, children engaged in stealth games or tag using the forest as cover, learning patience, agility, and observation. Seasonal festivals sometimes incorporated these environmental challenges, blending play with ceremonial activities. These interactions with nature offered not only amusement, but also subtle lessons in survival, teamwork, and cultural storytelling. Seasonal festivals and play integration across societies. Festivals were often timed to seasonal changes, creating natural opportunities for games and contests. For instance, spring festivals celebrated fertility and renewal, often including running races, ball games, or playful mock battles. Summer festivals, especially in riverine or coastal areas, emphasized water-based activities. Autumn harvest festivals encouraged cooperative games that reinforced community spirit, while winter festivals included sledding, ice skating, and indoor skill competitions. Children absorbed cultural values, learned social cooperation, and developed physical abilities through these seasonal engagements. Play became a medium for education, tradition, and creativity, seamlessly integrated into the cycles of the natural world. The sensory experience of the environment, the crisp air, flowing water, or rustling leaves, added a calming and immersive quality, making these games both enjoyable and meaningful. The timelessness of environmental play. Even without modern toys, electronic devices, or organized sports leagues, ancient children found endless ways to entertain themselves. Nature itself became a playground, with each season offering new challenges, surprises, and opportunities for creativity. Running across frosty fields, racing along rivers, or navigating dense woods provided excitement while nurturing essential skills. These activities illustrate a universal truth. Humans have always found joy in interacting with their surroundings. By observing patterns in nature, responding to seasonal rhythms, and engaging with peers, children developed adaptability, resilience, and a sense of wonder. The environmental and seasonal games of ancient societies remind us that play is not only timeless, but also deeply connected to the world around us.
Section 15.
Evening and nighttime games in ancient societies. As the sun dipped below the horizon in ancient towns and villages, a different kind of play emerged. Evening and nighttime were opportunities for imagination, storytelling, and games that embraced shadows, firelight, and the quiet of the world after work. These nocturnal activities were often slower, calmer, and more reflective than daytime games. Yet they carried a unique magic and charm that connected children and adults alike to their communities and the rhythms of the natural world. Shadow and firelight play. Before the invention of electric light, fire served as the central point of evening activity. Families gathered around hearths, braziers, or torches, creating a warm and luminous space. In ancient Greece, children and adults alike would engage in shadow play, using their hands, small figurines, or cutouts to project stories onto walls. These activities required imagination, dexterity, and creativity. In parts of Africa and Asia, similar shadow games were used to narrate myths and folklore. The flickering flames cast dynamic silhouettes, transforming simple gestures into stories of heroes, animals, and spirits. This combination of play and storytelling not only entertained, but also passed down cultural knowledge and morals, making evening games an immersive educational experience. Nighttime hide-and-seek and tag. Even after dusk, children found ways to remain active. Variations of hide-and-seek were played near homes, around town squares, or in safe forested areas, with the fading light adding a sense of mystery and excitement. In some medieval European villages, children would play tag using lanterns or torches, their shadows dancing across walls and streets. These games honed agility, alertness, and spatial awareness in low-light conditions, while also fostering camaraderie and social bonds. Nighttime play was not merely a continuation of daylight games, but a distinct experience, engaging the senses in unique ways and cultivating confidence and creativity. Storytelling and role-playing games. Evening often shifted toward quieter, reflective games that combined imagination and performance. In ancient Rome, youth sometimes enacted short dramatizations of historical events or mythological stories. Families in Mesopotamia engaged children with riddles and narrative games that challenged memory and verbal skill. Role-playing in dim candlelight encouraged expressive language, problem-solving, and empathy as children temporarily assumed different identities or explored moral dilemmas. These activities fostered a calm, meditative form of play, allowing participants to reflect on cultural values, personal experiences, and the world around them. Musical and rhythmic games. Music was an essential component of nighttime play across cultures. Children in ancient China might tap small drums or clappers in rhythm games, while Greek and Roman youth used simple lyres or flutes to accompany dances or circle games. In Africa, drumming and singing around evening fires facilitated playful competitions in rhythm, memory, and coordination. The combination of music, movement, and low light created a multi-sensory experience that was both calming and stimulating. These games promoted attentiveness, teamwork, and creative expression, leaving lasting memories of communal joy and cultural immersion. Integration of play with ritual and reflection. Many nighttime activities were intertwined with ritual, belief, and contemplation. In Celtic cultures, evening games during solstices and equinoxes blended play with ceremonial activities, teaching children about seasonal cycles and cosmology. In ancient India, storytelling and games performed at dusk were believed to strengthen the mind and spirit, offering relaxation and reflection after the labor of the day. Even when not overtly ritualistic, nighttime games allowed for the cultivation of patience, imagination, and social intelligence. The slower pace of evening play, often accompanied by soft firelight, gentle music, or rhythmic chants, created a meditative quality that balanced the active energy of daytime pursuits. The timeless appeal of nighttime play. Despite the lack of modern entertainment or artificial lighting, ancient societies found ways to make evenings magical. Shadow games, storytelling, role-playing, and musical activities transformed the simple act of gathering after dark into an enchanting experience. These practices remind us that play does not rely on toys, screens, or structured programs. Rather, it flourishes wherever creativity, community, and imagination meet. Nighttime games fostered skills that were practical, cognitive, and social, while also offering a calm, sensory-rich experience. From the flickering shadows of Mediterranean hearths to rhythmic drum circles in Africa and Asia, these ancient practices reveal that the human desire to explore, imagine, and connect does not diminish when the sun sets. Instead, it transforms, deepening our engagement with culture, nature, and one another. From the bustling daylight games of fields, rivers, and forests, to the intimate glow of evening storytelling and shadow play, ancient children and adults alike turned their environments into rich arenas of imagination, skill building, and cultural transmission. Every season, every natural element, and every moment of the day offered opportunities for meaningful engagement and joyful exploration. By observing these traditions, we gain insight into the resilience, creativity, and ingenuity of past societies. Play was not mere entertainment, it was a vital thread weaving together community, education, and connection to the world. The ancient rhythms of movement, imagination, and social interaction remind us that human beings across time and place have always sought ways to delight in life, to bond with one another, and to make even the simplest moments extraordinary. Through understanding the play of our ancestors, we can reclaim a sense of wonder and appreciation for the natural world, community, and the timeless art of joyful, imaginative engagement.